Descent into the past. Quote, "These Ynari are a curse upon our fractured race, a mockery of our Eldari forebears. How can we return to those days, united behind the false glamour of lost supremacy, when the follies of that age were so profound they scarred the universe? We have forged a path that leads away from damnation, tried and true. Those that would lead us back at the behest of a fanatic, a mutant, a demon are so deluded they should be sent to embrace the macabre shadow god they serve." End of quote from Millennial Autarch of Biel-Tan. The Guardians of the Threshold. The cataclysm that Yvraine had brought into Biel-Tan was not a sudden shattering, like that of broken crystal, but rather an eruption followed by a rippling spread, like that of a boulder dropped in a lake. By harnessing the death of the Craftworld's infinity circuit, the newcomers had brought into being the Yncarne avatar of Ynnead. In doing so, Yvraine had signaled the awakening of the Whispering God and opened a new path for the entire Eldar race. With so many departed souls concentrated in one place in real space, and his chosen followers gathered as one, Ynnead had many of the focal points he needed to manifest his power. With so many departed souls concentrated in one place in real space, and his chosen followers gathered as one, Ynnead had many of the focal points he needed to manifest his power. Yvraine had brought to Biel-Tan the consciousness that Eldrad Ulthran had failed to summon upon Coheria, though at a high cost. For light years in every direction from the dying Craftworld the Warp seethed, buckled and raged, 100 psychic vortexes whirling through the stars at once. The Yncarne's creation was a violent birth, and it had spread disaster near and far. The wraithbone skeleton of Biel-Tan was already rotting as a result of the demonic invasion. Rocked to its foundations by Yvraine's retrieval of the hidden chronosword, it was shaken apart. Whole sections of the Craftworld withered, split and fell away from the central mass like petals falling from a frozen Noah. The Craftworld, originally built from ancient Eldar starships to be an ark of salvation, shed its constituent parts to reveal a living megastructure shuddering in seismic upheaval. The slow but disastrous fragmentation was not confined to the physical realm. With the infinity circuit suddenly ooded with the psychic energy of death, the demons that had invaded it were banished utterly, repelled from its reaches by the sheer trauma of the Yncarne's manifestation. The ancestral Eldar souls who had once dwelt in that timeless limbo found themselves stranded on the brink of the abyss, with eternal darkness on one side and the seething soul hunger of Slaanesh on the other. The upheaval was so profound that many Eldar cast about for revenge. The potent emotions of the warlike Biel-Tan had always run hot, and initial shock soon became open hostility. To some, the cause of the Craftworld's demise was ascribed to a Cohorite invasion. To others, the spectre that had appeared in their midst was tainted by the energies of chaos, perhaps even a demon of Slaanesh in a cruel disguise. Were it not for the power and morbid beauty of the dread being that hovered above her, Yvraine would likely have been slain a dozen times over. Her Cohorite vanguard found itself fighting for its life more than once, but once Yvraine had entrusted the Visage with the sword of silent screams, none stood against them for long. Pockets of violence broke out wherever confusion outweighed solidarity. The spectre of kin strife was kept from consuming the Biel-Tan only by urgent psychic messages from their farseers. The seers worked harder than ever to save their home and the spirits of their ancestors that dwelt within it. All the while, the void above resounded to distant laughter. The Craftworld was infected, now the Biel-Tan fought for survival. At Lathriel's command, every Eldar on the path of the seer took wastelands from the spectral gardens and pressed him to stretches of naked wraithbone, beckoning the lost spirits of the dead into the safety of the psychoactive gems. Once the transfer was complete, the seers handed them reverently to jet-bike-mounted couriers that bore them swiftly to Biel-Tan's ghost halls. Thereat the spirits incorporated them into ghost warrior constructs in order to save them, for the wraithbone shells of the unliving warriors were separate from the infected material of the Infinity Circuit. The Eldar of that proud world ship viewed the creation of such wraith warriors as a kind of necromancy, but they had little choice if they wanted to preserve the legacy of their ancestors. The mass installation of stranded spirits into bipedal shells was an act of soulcraft on a grand scale. Even as the craft world broke apart, the ghost halls were emptied until thousands of wraith constructs stood upon Biel-Tan's cracking landscapes. A strange phenomenon occurred wherever Yvraine and her allies passed through the wreckage and ruin. Following the lead of their mistress, blood brides and incubi darted, leapt and vaulted to those sections of the Infinity Circuit that could not be reached by the seers. They pressed empty wastelands to those areas where the will and the wisp revealed ancient souls clustered within broken wraithbone. Even though they had not the psychic mastery of the spirits, yet the lambent lights of departed spirits seemed to owe out of the Infinity Circuit and pass straight into those wastelands. Some of the Biel-Tani that witnessed this act saw it as soul theft and drew their weapons to lay low the dark Eldar warriors they saw as parasites in their midst. In every instance, a harlequin interposed his blade, shaking his head solemnly by way of warning. These were the Ynari, they said, the reborn faithful of Ynnead. Eldars are in tune with death, that long-dead ancestors would join them willingly. Through it all, the messengers of Biel-Tan practiced their uncanny art. Some resculpted the wraithbone of the shinecraft and dome ships that had split away from the Craftworld. Others raised healing chansons and plain songs that saw the ash-black skeleton of Biel-Tan slowly reform, a cadaverous shadow of its former incarnation, but a mighty world ship nonetheless. It would take Terran decades, if not centuries, for the world ship to be rebuilt. The Craftworld's solar sails were eaten away, and at its rear, the webway gate Icadum pulsed as if in pain. Warp storms raged in a vast corona around the Craftworld as the psychic shockwave of the Yncarne's birth bled out into the wider universe. Yvraine felt uncertainty settle upon her for the first time in solar months, her absolute faith wavering. With the fabric of the material realm torn to shreds around the Ynari, there would be no escape from the ailing Craftworld, be it through realspace or the labyrinthine dimension. It was no agent of Biel-Tan that saved them from the doldrums of stasis, nor even that of Ynnead, but those of Ulthran, Craftworld of the damned. The ripples of Ynnead's awakening spread through the cosmos. For those with the gift of the psychic witch sight, it was a discoloration of the sky that was impossible to ignore. Even the humblest soothsayer saw deathly omens. Across the galaxy, scattered bones fell in the shape of Ynnead's crosspiece and crucible rune, eyes glowed with white fire in prophetic dreams, and jagged crone's claws shimmered in bloody scrying bells. For the expert psychers of the Eldar race, the effect was far starker. Many were seized with waking nightmares, crying out in fear and clutching their hearts as visions of a deathly revenant burned in their mind's eye. The Infinity Circuit of every Craftworld besides Biel-Tan glowed white-hot with iring anticipation, each world ship lit brightly and given a burst of acceleration by this spiritual renaissance. The Eldar people looked to the seers for an explanation. Those who had mastered the psychic wave of fear and hope led the people in meditation on the nature of this twist in the skein of fate. Everywhere the seers cast their minds, the tapestries of fate were unraveling and taking a new shape. Every strand of causality led ultimately to the darkness of the Ranadandra, just as they had since the birth of the great enemy. But that darkness, it seemed, was far more distant than before. The members of the Seer Council of Craftworld Ulthran were the most skilled of all the kind. They saw clearly the revelation that Yvraine had engineered upon Biel-Tan. The most senior of their number, Eldrad Ulthran, demanded that Yvraine and her reborn kin be brought to Ulthran as swiftly as possible. In public, the rest of the Seer Council agreed his reasoning was sound. In private, when the High Farseer was deep in his meditations, they made subtle inferences that Eldrad had overstepped his bounds, and their agendas were no longer the same. The Eldars of Ulthran conducted a great runic ritual at Eldrad's behest, using the spiritual link between the crystal seers that populated the Great Dome and those of Biel-Tan's recently devastated equivalent. The ritual was a gamble, despite the fact the hyperspatial link through the warp was strong between the two craft worlds. Though the warp storms that raged near Ulthran and Biel-Tan could theoretically be psychically channeled into a tunnel leading through the warp from one craft world to the other, the process might well consume the souls of the travelers that walked it, and those that had conducted the ritual too. To use the crystal seers as conduits for psychic energy instead of revering them as honored ancestors was a gross breach of craft world culture. It was considered even worse than taking a spirit into a wasteland and transferring it to a wraith construct. The Farseers that had undergone the kind's peculiar transformation into psycho-crystal, before later joining with their craft world's infinity circuit, had earned their long rest a dozen times over. To break the departed seers from that connection, and to use them as mere tools for sorcery, was a heinous crime indeed, but one Eldrad Ulthran had already committed, through his Harlequin proxies, on every craft world across the galaxy. Such was the urgency of the hour that the Farseers showed no compunction in doing so again. The seers gambled much if the ritual went awry. In theory, a single lapse of concentration could see the portal open a tunnel into the Empyrean itself, allowing a demonic incursion to spill into Ulthran just as it had into Biel-Tan. If the seers of Ulthran had not been confident in the psychic supremacy and had the mental might to back that confidence up, they may well have capsized the entire world ship into the warp. As it was, the skills proved equal to the task. The Seer Council had gathered in Ulthran's fabled dome, answering Eldrad's summons. Their rune-emblazoned robes waved gently in the same warm zephyrs that caressed the branches of wraithbone trees in the distance. One of the undisputed wonders of the craft worlds, the Dome of Crystal Seers, was dotted with staircases of spiraling wraithbone that stretched up to nowhere. All bar the highest steps harbored the fossilized remnants of an ancient seer. Atop these staircases stood the luminaries of the craft world, their voices joined in the Song of Ulthanash. Abruptly, the song ended. "Here we stand," spoke Eldrad from his position atop the tallest staircase, ready to usher in a new age for Ulthran and the Eldari race. "Eldari," said Yemshon-Ilfwa. "That name has no place this side of the Fall." "Until now," said Eldrad. "Our guests to be resurrected with good reason." Several of the seers raised eyebrows by a fraction of an inch but did not speak out. "We summon the Bridge of Stars," continued Eldrad, his fabled staff describing the rune of the infinite stride. "This night we have need of it, no matter the cost." "As you say," said Araly Copperman, a strange edge to her voice, "we have no choice." The Farseers and Warlocks assembled atop the dome's stairways chanted once more, casting runes of star striding and storm walking into the air. The psychic runes rose, glowing, to describe the wide circle in the caster's midst. Glittering motes of light span around the symbols, faster and faster, as the dome's gentle breeze became a gale, then a hurricane. The periphery of the warp storm raging outside the craft world curdled into the funnel of a tornado in spacetime, the tip both remaining still and stretching until light years into the ether. By the time the ritual was complete, 3 of Ulthran's finest Farseers had turned to psycho-reactive crystal from head to toe. In their midst, a portal shone, within it, destiny made Esh. With Eldrad Ulthran leading the runic rite, an unstable warp portal opened up under Ulthran's dome of crystal seers. Uncounted light years away, Yvraine walked as if in a daze to the shattered equivalent upon Biel-Tan. What she found in that dome was all but invisible to the naked eye, but the Yncarne was drawn towards it as driftwood is drawn to a whirlpool. The Reborn, the Ynari, for that was the name Yvraine's followers had adopted for themselves, passed through the warp portal and vanished from Biel-Tan altogether. The howling, screaming vortex through which the Reborn passed was the embodiment of utter chaos. So fierce and baleful was this passageway it would have robbed the sanity of a lesser being in a matter of moments. Yet the Reborn found themselves oating through a tunnel cut in the warp unhindered as if borne by an underwater current. At the fore was the Yncarne, a revenant creature so inimical to chaos that the psychic stuff of the Empire could not slow it. Even the gods of chaos did not look upon the creature directly. The incarnation of Ynnead's essence was so anathema to them they could not truly perceive it, even had they known where to look. The ripples of the Avatar's passage owed outward nonetheless, causing a great ruction in the warp. The bow wave of its translocation cast Imperial void ships aside hundreds of light years away, ripping open Geller fields and distorting the light of the Astronomicon. Thousands of human lives were lost with every solar second of the Reborn's passage. It was a price the Eldar would gladly pay 1,000,000 times over if it gave them even the slightest chance of turning the tables upon their nemesis, Slaanesh. With Yvraine came her Coheria allies, but also a detachment of warriors from Biel-Tan. Even as the Craftworld fell apart around her, there had been those that had believed her claims of rejuvenation and salvation. Across every stratum of Craftworld Eldar society, there were those who had thrown in their lot with Ynnead's disciples, declaring themselves reborn. Foremost amongst those converted to Yvraine's cause were dire avengers from the Silvered Blade, the aspect shrine in which the Visage, in his former life, had taught Yvraine the path of the warrior. Near 70 of the tall-crested warriors had forsaken the traditional colors and, with a few simple minutes of concentration, altered the psychically attuned metafabrics of their aspect armor until it bore the same coloration as Yvraine's regal panoply and the deep scarlet plate of the Visage at her side. The dire avengers were far from alone. Biel-Tan was once a highly populated craftworld, and the appearance of the god of the dead's avatar had been a compelling sign that Yvraine spoke the truth about a new order coming into existence for the Eldar. With the dire avengers came warriors from every aspect, guardian citizens in the garb of the Craftworld's militia, whole squadrons of grav tank pilots and rank upon rank of silent ghost warriors. These wraith-like converts had been given a chance to truly live again, for the transfer from Biel-Tan's shattered infinity circuit had been more complete than any Spiritseer or Wasteland could ever achieve. Yvraine did not disappoint her new followers. All those who had joined the Ynari course had heard her speak about the hope she brought to their race, and many influential Biel-Tani were soon devoted to it body and soul. For too long the Eldar, be they Craftworld, Exodite, Harlequin, Outcast or Coheria, had skulked in the darkness, afraid to burn too brightly lest they catch the attention of she who thirsts. To have a force amongst them that could take the fight back to Slaanesh, even one as disturbing as the Yncarne, was freeing, a call to action that no Eldari had felt for 10,000 Terran years. Trail of the Seers. The tunnel through reality is known as the Bridge of Stars yawned, spasmed and pulsed. Through that secret aperture came the Ynari, the favored of Ynnead. The combination of the Seer Council's runic powers and the powerful psyche of the Yncarne had brought the Reborn safely to the crystal havens of Ulthran, one step closer to securing the 2 lost chronoswords that Yvraine sought from the husk of the lost Eldar Empire. The combination of the Seer Council's runic powers and the powerful psyche of the Yncarne had brought the Reborn safely to the crystal havens of Ulthran, one step closer to securing the 2 lost chronoswords that Yvraine sought from the husk of the lost Eldar Empire. Though the manner of the coming had cost the lives of several Farseers and driven some of the Ynari half-mad with fear, the stillness that descended upon Ulthran's dome of crystal seers after their safe passage was a balm to the soul. First to emerge was the Yncarne, hissing and whispering in the voices of the dead. The Ulthran Council felt the cold mantle of terror upon him at the sight. A creature came forward like a ghost, slow and ethereal, the energies of the other world swelling around it. It was slender and androgynous, yet far larger and more fearsome than any Eldar warrior save perhaps the avatar of the bloody-handed god. Where the living statue of Kalo-Menshir-Ken was a creature of fire, iron and blood, the Yncarne manifested a shuddering chill that was both invigorating and shocking, like a deluge of ice water. In the Revenant's wake came Yvraine and the Visage, leading the Reborn to gather beneath crystal stairways. The crested helms of the Ulthwaciers turned to look down at the newcomers with the unwavering gaze of raptors. There was an electrifying tension, a sense of history in the making. To the relief of all those nearby, the Yncarne drifted from the dome's heart and circulated around the periphery, staring at each of the crystal seers in turn as if hunting for something. It was Yvraine who spoke first, formally thanking the seers of Craftworld Ulthran for their aid. To cross the galaxy in a matter of solar hours was a feat worthy of the Eldari at the apex of their power. It was a status they could achieve once more, now that Ynnead had shown him the seventh way, the path between darkness and light. First, though, they had to ensure the physical conduits of the god of the dead were brought together. The Chronoswords, when united, could act as a focal point for Ynnead's ascension, thereby restoring the broken cycle of life and death. The Visage claimed that two of these blades were buried in the heart of the Eldar's former empire. They were somewhere upon the crone world known as Biel-Tan, caught between realspace and the warp in the Hour of Terror. With Ulthran having kept vigil over that vast tempest for so long, they were the logical choice of allies. Eldrad Ulthran nodded quietly in satisfaction as the openers of the seventh way made the case. "You ask the impossible," sneered Yemshon Ilfwar of the Seer Council, shaking his head before putting on his ghost helm. "Pray be still, daughter of shades, and keep your people in silence. Your presence is desired, of course, but we have matters of the past to attend to before we consider the future." "There is no matter of more import than this," said Eldrad Ulthran, his tone grave. "I have foreseen it." "You have foreseen much," answered one of his peers, Arily Copperman, donning her own helm with ceremonial formality. "And yet ultimately, it seems you are blind." "I see further than all others, and act accordingly," said Eldrad indignantly, "which is why our kindred now stand here, on the threshold of a lasting victory over she who thirsts." "I see further than all others, and act accordingly," said Eldrad indignantly, "which is why our kindred now stand here, on the threshold of a lasting victory over she who thirsts." "An impressive claim," said Yemshon, inclining his helmed head. "But a victory at what cost?" "The destruction of Craftworld Biel-Tan. The loss of thousands of Eldar ancestors. The dissolution of harmony itself." "There will always be those whose vision is clouded by fear," said Eldrad. "Now we proceed. Muster the Black Guardians." "No," said Arily. The word resounded through the dome of crystal seers like a dropped tombstone. "Eldrad Ulthran," said High Jerog the Blind from the crystal stairs opposite, "we, the Seer Council of Ulthran Shellway, accuse you of misappropriation of our mutual destiny. In conjunction with the Midnight Sorrow, who exist outside our cultural jurisdiction, you engaged in the theft of the crystal seers." At this, High Jerok motioned towards a stairway step where the lack of a fossilized fascia was like a missing tile in a sacred mosaic. "After taking the remains of these long-serving heroes, you formed a hyperspatial link with the crystal sands of Coheria, thereby endangering every departed Eldar soul in every Craftworld. The death blow to Slaanesh was leveled, Ynnead dealt," protested Eldrad. "Were it not for the intervention of the crass warriors of humanity." And yet they did intervene, and your ritual fell apart like Yncarne's castle of bone, said Yncarne, risking billions of souls, and all but handing she who thirsts the chance to consume every craftworlder who has died since the fall. In seeking to keep the Rana Dandra at bay, said Hierarch the Blind, you may well have hastened its onset. Your behavior is intolerable, said Aradli. It is not for you to decide the fate of our race by yourself, nor to dabble in the affairs of gods. You are no god, Eldrad Ulthran. You are barely even an Eldar, for you should have joined the ranks of your crystal brethren long ago. Your time is long past. It is the will of the Seer Council that you be exiled to the void. At this, Eldrad stumbled as if he had been struck. Act once more on the behalf of the Eldar race, said Yncarne, and you will be put to death. The judgment of the Seer Council saw Eldrad slump to the oar, his grandeur evaporated in the heat of their ire. Every one of his 10,000 Terran years and more weighed heavy upon him, and his bones, already half crystal, felt like jagged knives within his sparse frame. To have his annoyance over the fate of his race eradicated was worse than death to the ancient Farseer, for he had striven for nothing else since the fall. Yvraine spoke eloquently in Eldrad's defense, only to find herself verbally attacked in turn. Who was she to demand the Seer Council lend her aid, and to request they follow her led into the stronghold of the great enemy? By her direct action, Ulthway's martial ally, the ancient and proud craftworld Biel-Tan, had been reduced to a skeletal shadow upon the brink of extinction. What was to prevent the same fate from happening to Ulthway? Was it not enough that they stood sentinel over the Eye of Terror, thwarting the chaos-tainted armies that emerged from within it and sending the citizen soldiers against the worst terrors in the universe? Many of Yvraine's Biel-Tani followers reacted strongly to the hostility of Ulthway's seers. They held forth with great passion, saying that though the craft-world had indeed suffered after the apotheosis of Yncarne, and though they could never truly forgive her, they truly believed the damage could be healed. More importantly, there was a greater battle being fought, worth more than life itself. With a way to escape Slanch's curse, there was a slim chance that Biel-Tan might succeed in its quest to restore the former glory of the Eldar. It was a crusade once seen as futile by many of the Biel-Tani present, but admitted to by none amongst them, for to do so was an unthinkable stigma within their militant culture. Now there was real hope of success. Their argument was persuasive, but many Eldar seers remained unconvinced. When asked by the Ulthway Farseers if they spoke on behalf of the craftworld, or as a rogue splinter faction, the Biel-Tani Reborn had no answer. That in itself was telling enough. On and on the debate raged, the usual allusions to well-trodden Eldar myths and social mores giving way to veiled insults and outright displays of anger. The Ulthway Seer Council believed that Eldrad, Yvraine and the fellow revolutionaries represented the worst of all disruptive annoyances. Though they had reknitted the skein of possible futures, they had done so at so great a cost, and in so reckless a manner, they could not be trusted. It was during this scathing assessment that Yncarne Ulthwar suddenly paused mid-rhetoric, the heat of his anger still radiating as he glanced sharply at his fellow elders. A psychic impulse passed through the ranks of the Seer Council at that moment, the urgency of the missive bringing the debate to a pause. Word had arrived of yet more visitors to Ulthway, via the Great Webway Gate at the world ship's rear. A delegation from another craft world had arrived. A diplomatic corps was already inbound, making for the Dome of Crystal Seers with all haste. When the tall-helmed warriors made their way into the dome and approached the impromptu war council that raged there, a smile came once more to Eldrad Ulthran's features. These mysterious warriors were clad in the colors of the fabled craftworld Altansar. Within craftworld society, the Eldar of Altansar have long dwelt in the twilight of mistrust. Much speculation surrounds them. They speak only in whispers, and never remove their helmets, no matter the situation. During the calamitous times of the fall, Altansar was on the periphery of the Eye of Terror, the cosmic wound resulting from Slansh's birth. At first, the populace believed themselves safe, but the gravitic pull of that immense warp storm gradually drew the Craftworld and its attendant void ships into its reaches over the course of 500 Terran years. The only Eldar to escape Altans's doom was the Phoenix Lord Maogan, first of the Dark Reapers. Towards the end of the 41st millennium of the Imperial calendar, that legendary warrior sought his Craftworld in the depths of the Eye. After a grueling series of trials, he managed to locate Altansar and guide it through the insanity of that etheric tempest. It re-emerged through the Cadian Gate, bringing the Altansari into the material dimension once more after their impossibly long incarceration. Since that day, the Altansar Eldar have used the symbol of the broken chain to represent their Craftworld. Set free from their eternal bondage, they have fought tirelessly against the forces of Shehuthusts. Yet despite the proven loyalty to the Eldar cause, the matter of how the Altansari survived their millennial imprisonment in the dark heart of chaos has proved persistent. The Altansari are unwelcome on many Craftworlds, even forbidden, amid fears they are not as closely aligned to Craftworld culture as they claim and secretly serve Slaanesh, despite the evidence to the contrary. The question is asked time and again, have they not been tainted by their ordeal, changed by the ruinous powers that roam the Eye at will? Usually, such questions are put aside, but with the appearance of an Altansar delegation at this critical time upon Ulthway, they arose in greater measure than ever before. A furor broke out almost immediately. To add fuel to the fires of controversy, the Altansari were moving to side with Yvraine. It was the warlock Gentilian Onyxblade who stepped forward to represent Altansar. Her low whisper was unheard at first amongst the raised voices of the Ulthway seers, but when she reached up and unclasped her helm with a dual puff of escaping air, the dome's interior fell silent once more. Only the Yncarne could be heard, its unnerving hiss turning from the sibilance of a questing serpent to something like a sigh of relief. Tall even for an Eldar, Gentilian was a striking sight. Her skin was so pale and waxen it was as if she had died long ago. Many of those gathered could not shake the notion they were looking upon a well-preserved corpse. The warlock held her long black witch blade as if it were a rod of office, proof that though she was one of a forgotten kindred, she still walked the path. At her side was one of the rare feline creatures known as Gyrinxes, those psychic familiars that bolstered the mental and spiritual power of those they took as masters. The dome's atmosphere grew thicker as the warlock climbed atop a nearby spiral of crystal stairs to speak. Autarch Orensei extended you welcome after all, then, said Yemshon, nodding in greeting. The gates of Asuran's halls open, and cleanse those who enter. There are those who call Ulthway damned, interjected Surlius the Wise, addressing his fellow council member, purely for our proximity to the Eye. We would be the worst kinds of hypocrites if we were to refuse those of Altansar for the same reasons. And we thank you for it, said Gentilian. Disturbingly, her soft whisper was echoed by every one of her kindred. You came to speak in defense of Eldrad Ulthran and the Ynnead, said Yemshon. Have you a vested interest in this matter? We must return to the Eye, said the Altansar warlock, her Gyrinx prowling around her legs. The blade that the Daughter of Shades speaks of must be reclaimed from our enemies if our race is to transcend. I know in which city it lies. We failed once, and only escaped Shehuthusts thanks to the shroud Ynnead cast over us. We cannot fail again. At her words, many of the Altansari shifted uncomfortably, looking through the translucent dome walls to the Eye of Terror's purple bruise amongst the stars. I cannot ask my people to return to the Eye, said Gentilian, but neither can I stand idle. "Sir, I give my soul to Yvraine, and to Ynnead himself." Raising her sword, she slashed her own throat wide open. Black blood spurted outward as she gasped her last. Yvraine darted forward, grabbing Gentilion's body. The Ynari priestess seemed to inhale deeply even as the warlock's body slumped, lifeless and pale. A moment later the Gearinx, purring in recognition, rubbed itself against Yvraine's legs. "And so we must act," said Yvraine, staring unfocused into the middle distance. "We must leave now to retrieve the chronoswords of Belial IV, lest the handmaidens of Slaanesh reach it first." "Surely the risk of snuffing out this ichor of hope is too great," replied Yemshon. He twitched a finger, and a trio of Ulthwé warlocks drew their own witch blades. "We cannot allow you to take the fate of so many into your hands. The wise do not pin their hopes upon a life unborn. Would this journey not be better made by the warriors of Craftworld Ylcarne? They profess to know the Crone worlds better than any other." "None know the Eye as well as the Altansari," said Yvraine. "They have navigated its tides for thousands of cycles, avoiding the claws of the demon with each new day. Gentilion's sacrifice will not be in vain." There were whispers of assent from the Altansari behind her, building to a hissing chorus. "No," said Yemshon. He raised his arms, and ethereal winds raced around the dome, knocking several of the Altansari Eldar from their feet. "You and your followers will stay until the Seer Councils decide your fate." The psychic hurricane blew harder still, and the craft world erupted into utter bedlam. Courtly negotiations turned to veiled threats, then to open hostility as the Ulthwé psykers threw up barriers of psychic force and sent strength-sapping curses into the ranks of the Ynari. The Visage fought through the psychic tempest, his blade raised as he made for Yemshon. The Yncarne loomed from the shadows, a storm of glittering spirits whirling around it as it bore down on the chanting seers. Then a clarion shout rang out. The harlequins of the Mask of the Midnight Sorrow stepped out one by one from behind the darkest of the crystal statues, each striking a pose as if parrying a blow. With them was an elderly farseer clad in a simple black robe. The Seer Council looked on in wonder. The newcomer was Kaisadurus the Anchorite, wisest of all Ulthwé's visionaries. He had emerged from his self-imposed imprisonment to speak to his people. The psychic hurricane that raged around the dome ebbed away, becalmed in an instant as Kaisadurus raised his staff above his head. He spoke in a croaking baritone, a voice that had clearly not been used for solar decades but yet carried immense weight. "They stood at the crux point of fate," he said. "Whether the seers wished it so or not, the Ynari had to leave, or else another craft world would die, never to be reborn." As one, the Seer Council turned away. The Ynari, their ranks now bolstered not only by the Biel-Tan, but also by a few bold Altansari, the Harlequins of the Midnight Sorrow, and a swathe of Ulthwé sympathizers, made for the dome's primary gates. With them went the Yncarne, the ground crackling with hoarfrost at its passage. Eldrad Ulthran followed the creature, bent under the weight of his peers' censure. Kaisadurus, using his staff as a support, went with him. Before the craft world's diurnal cycle ended, the Ynari had left for the Eye of Terror. They embarked upon a journey of supreme peril, for the journey was to Slaanesh's own birthplace. Not one of them looked back.